All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's seminar, Unlocking Your Plant's Potential, Optimized Quality, Reporting and Operations, brought to you by Aquatic Informatics. So welcome. Thanks for joining. A couple of things before we get started. Just want to advise of a couple of tips to enhance your webinar experience. We recommend you close email, any messaging apps, any applications, File Explorer, anything that may cause any disruption or interfere with a smooth reception. So we want this to be a great user experience. We don't want to really cause any buffering or poor sound quality. So yeah, for the best experience, please close any applications, emails, anything like that. Also, technical assistance can be found at the GoToWebinar technical support page at the link listed in your handouts and on the slide shown. I also want to inform you and mention that of specific products or services in this webinar does not represent AWWA endorsement. AWWA does not endorse or approve products or services. So I want to make sure we have that disclaimer. Also, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, but in the meantime, please submit your questions for presenters in the chat function at any time. Although we'll hold a Q&A session at the end, I will be able to we'll be able to see any questions in the chat section. We'll either answer some of those questions directly in the chat. For any questions we don't answer in the chat, we will hold off to the end and answer those questions for the whole larger audience. Okay. So, hello. I am your host, Brian Sharpneck. I am a Senior Account Manager for Aquatic Informatics, formerly with Hach as an Application Development Manager, and really specific around our software products, which includes Hach WIMS and Rio, which we're going to be talking through today. I'd also like to introduce my counterpart, Dave Rutowski, who is a Process Optimization Advisor at Hach. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Tony Jones, who I've known for quite some time and who has done some webinars with me, as well as in-person presentations at some of our national user conferences and our WIMS user group. So Tony is REWA's project manager and works for Bellwether Consultants. So really interested in a great time who's going to be talking through some of our data and what REWA is doing with Rio and WIMS together. So Tony, thank you ahead of time. So just a little bit of history, lots of things going on, lots of changes, and how are we growing our strength in our water quality? So as everybody knows, our data management platform, really we came to Hach in 2009 with Hach, and from there we were joined Danaher, Hach joined Danaher back in 1999. And with the WIMS platform coming into Hach, it's been a Hach product for quite some time. Well, back a couple of years ago, Danaher acquired Aquatic Informatics, which is part of the Danaher platform. And this is actually a celebration of their 20-year anniversary. So being in the market for any software solution. So decided that, hey, to grow our water product and our water quality and having more data management software, we really wanted to strengthen our capabilities. So with Aquatic Informatics joining this family, part of the Danaher family, we were able to really cross all platforms and have products that meet your entire digital strategy, especially around data management solutions, which we'll talk through more today. So now, fast forward to earlier this year, about 2 months ago, we have now joined the Veralto family. So Veralto, now we are able to, it's part of a larger implementation that's a family of our water companies and bringing a wider variety of software solutions to really address any customer problems with our software solutions. So just a little bit of quick history of how our operations and really just focusing on strengthening our capabilities around software solutions for our customers. So for today's agenda, we've already been through the introductions. Well, what we want to talk about is better water data management solutions. right? How do we use data management solutions to overcome challenges, overcome objectives, and better water process management throughout? So Dave's going to talk a little bit about the process management side of really bringing all this data together and how we utilize this to improve efficiencies, optimizations, things like that. Then I'm going to hand it over to Tony for REWA's journey to that digital transformation. So utilizing Rio on top of their data management solutions to have a complete digital transformation. So really looking forward to that. Then we'll wrap it up with a summary of what are some of the key learnings, what are some of the objectives that we're able to overcome and really adhere to our digital strategy. And then, of course, like I mentioned earlier, we'll have a Q&A at the end. Again, I'll answer questions as much as we can in the chat. So please drop those questions in the chat, and anything we don't answer, we will provide a Q&A at the end. So to begin, what are some of the challenges, right? How do we begin to gain value from the data we're collecting? So what does your data journey look like? So some of the challenges that we run into with data management is, number one, we have silos and buckets of data, right? How do we centralize and bring all of this data together to make it more useful, to make quicker decisions, right? So a lot of challenges going into centralizing all of this data. How are we doing that now? So number one, big challenge, how do we centralize this data? Number two, what do we want to be able to do? How can we automate all this? With automation, we want to be able to reduce errors, improve efficiencies and accuracy with the data, continuously have defensible data that we can utilize quickly and easily. So how can we automate all of this data and eliminate manual input of data and really making improvements on the accuracy of that data? Number three, common, right? We need accessibility to all of this data, right? How oftentimes are we waiting, for the lab to get some data, vice versa, where operations get data? Hey, we're going on plant rounds, we have paper, we're waiting for that data to get input and centralized. So we need accessibility to all of the data. This is a very common challenge. We don't want to wait for the data. We want to have access to it, data at our fingertips. And finally, one of the last other challenges is how do we leverage tools for auto report generation? And I want to add to that some of the visualization as well. So how can we leverage easy to use tools to, number one, produce our reports, our MORs, our DMRs, any of those electronic type reports, right? So how do we do that now? Is it a manual process? So again, we want to be able to visualize and being able to use these reports and actually use the data. So the path, how do we get started with that data journey to meet accurate compliance and operational data? So I'm going to walk through optimizing operations and kind of go through that data journey, right? Through each of these layers. So number one, you have your physical layer. This is my plant. This is my infrastructure, right? We have our processes, we have our equipment, we have all of this in place. So what's that next layer that we want to be able to do to visualize data and have data as part of this journey? The next piece we need to put in is a sensing and controls, right? This is where Hach comes in. We have our SC1000s, we have our controllers, online instrumentation, lab benchtop equipment, right? We want to be able to sense the data and control the data via SCADA, right? Our HMIs. And speaking of SCADA, how do we record and collect this data and communicate with this data? So how are we gathering that data? Well, we have our historians, or we have our HMI, or we're logging this data and doing our process control. Fantastic. But that next step, that next layer is how are we producing this data to do reporting, compliance, analysis, right? What is our data management strategy right now? How are we able to look at this data? Are we using something like Excel? How are we centralizing that data? And this is where our data fusion and analysis comes in. This is what we want to be able to do. We have all of these layers in place. We have our equipment in place. We have our communications and collections in place. How do we make this easier and utilize data management strategies to do alerting and notifications? And what's key to me is the visualization and the reporting, right? And sustaining and maintaining our plant, right? And our data. Being able to do data discovery, right? We want to be able to do deep dive analysis into our data and not have the struggles or the ability to go, hey, I have data everywhere. I want to be able to go pull and analyze and do this data. We should have something in place in our data management digital strategies that are able to provide diagnostic analysis, predictive analysis, correlations, right? We want to be knowledgeable with all of that data. Doing prescriptive analytics, deep dives. We want to make changes. We want to do what if scenarios. So these are all incorporated as part of our digital strategy moving forward, and not having to wait for the data and have all these analysis tools and statistical analysis tools in place to take action on the data. So to summarize this a little bit more and to paint that larger picture, what is our current state right now? If I'm not using a data management solution, how are we collecting and gathering this data? So whenever we talk to customers or utilities around the country, North America, we're always asking the questions, what are the main sources where you get your data from? And the top three answers we get are, we get our process data from our SCADA system. We get our lab data from, guess where? Contract lab, internal lab, or both. And then the third piece, which Tony's I'm so looking forward to this. The third piece is capturing that field data and digitizing that field data. Right now, we're on clipboard, paper, collecting that data. How do we digitize that and include this as part of our data management strategy? So the next question we ask is, where does all of this data go right now to do that compliance reporting and analysis, right? And I've coined this phrase so many times. This is what I refer to as the data train. The data train just simply means we have data everywhere, right? We have Excel sheets over here. We have PDFs from my contract lab over here. We have all of these sources of data. So now when it comes time to doing reporting and analysis, this becomes a very manual process. Why? Because I have to manually build out my reports and any of that type of analysis if I'm not using a data management strategy. There's a lot of challenges that go into mining and managing the data through the data train, right? Number one, over here on the right-hand side, lots of copying and pasting, a lot of data duplication. How often are we inputting the same data multiple times? Speaking of multiple times, multiple files of the same thing. How many of us have experienced working in Excel? I have different Excel files of the same data. Everybody has their own copy, which is the most recent, and so on, right? So definitely some version control and multiple files, and which really reduces accuracy and increases errors with the data. Perhaps the biggest challenge out there is this can be a very time-consuming process. I've seen where this takes hours, days, weeks to put my information together, make my data available and useful, and doing reporting and analysis. Again, at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is improve that accuracy and integrity from the data. So with a data management strategy in place, we're able to address those challenges that go into managing the data through that data train, centralizing all of my data, industry-specific calculations, defensible data around audit trails, visualization around dashboards, graphs, and my reporting, and the ability to automate these processes, right? Automatically capture my data from my process data from SCADA, from my historians, right? Field data through Rio, which you're going to learn about today with Tony, and how they implemented that and really improved their digital strategy. And then the lab piece is connecting automatically to WIMS systems, even contract labs, and capturing and bringing that data in from CSV file structures. So at the end of the day, once we centralize all of this data, now we can enhance and become knowledgeable with the data. Why? Because that data is available to anybody, anytime, anywhere, to really improve decision-making, more real-time decision-making, which leads to optimizing processes, reducing costs around chemical usage, energy usage, labor, right? So we've seen several examples of utilities who are using this data management strategy to drive and really recognize these advantages with their data solutions. So right now, I'm going to pass that over to Dave to talk through the data value chain.
All right, thank you so much, Brian. And Brian makes a great point. There is definitely a chain type process here that you can't really advance within your plan to your process without having a good foundation and a good start. And all things within a plant, because it's permit, because it's process, starts with good data. You know, having the right measurement in the right place. And from the Hach side of things, as the instrument company, the right instrument that's giving a good, reliable, consistent value that's representative of the process. It might start with something as simple as a grab and lab sample, maybe once a month, once a week, once a shift, once every 4 hours, and pretty soon it builds the need for true on-time, real-time data collection, because more data tells a better story of what's really going on with the plant. The next thing you can do is start comparing and using a platform like WIMS or Rio to compare two separate and maybe dissimilar data points within the plant, but see that there might be more than just correlation, but causation that is driving your process in a positive direction, or maybe not so positive and leading you towards, you know, excess chemical, excess energy, excess labor to try to fix things. So that's where we take all that good data from good instruments and start to bring it together and review. And the closet full of banker boxes of paper is still very much a thing. The problem with that is no one ever goes back in those boxes and reviews this month, this year, compared to the same month last year or 5 years ago to see if things are changing. Is it environmental? Is a new industry coming, or is an industry leaving your facility that's causing changes to the process? Nice thing is, it's beyond just numbers on a page or numbers on a screen. And that's where the visualization and sharing part comes in. A trend tells a story, not only to the operators. One of the great quotes I like to use is, the data will help you understand what you already know. And an operator might see something day in and day out, and that's kind of just the way it is. But having the data and a trend allows them to talk to whoever it might be. We need new equipment, and here's why. It's not just an operator saying, I need a new pump for my chemical. It's saying our current pump is maxed out and we're not providing enough chemical. Or the system was designed too large and we can't turn it down low enough to kind of see the savings of chemical reduction, because the pump at its slowest is still overdosing. So the sharing of data and showing the information really leads to the final is the insights and decision making, that everyone can see the same thing, understand the same thing, either as a training tool, an operational tool, or to say what happened and why. And if there is a glitch, a hiccup, if you will, in the report, here's what happened and why. Was it just a one-off event, or is it something that happens recurring that really needs to be addressed, and the plant needs to make changes to fix a recurring problem before it becomes a serious violation? Next. Perfect, thank you, Brian. And here's where, back to the operators and what they see every day and what they know every day, there are so many data points that a plant could have with an online sensor. Maybe it's just something they do once a month or once a quarter as a regulatory thing. Maybe it's something they do every day because it's process critical. There are so many data points within a plant that can be captured. And it's not always an analytical sensor. Maybe it's just a tank level or a flow meter or an observation of something that needs to be recorded. So going from online sensors and the laboratory data and all the historical data and historians to bring it all together, not every plant is going to have every single data point, but every plant has important data. And some data, quite honestly, is only there for regulatory sake, because your agency says thou shalt test this, you have to test it. And you have to save that data so it can be easily brought up, easily reviewed, and easily submitted. But with that said, there's a lot of this data that is driving the process, and a small change in one area can really lead to significant changes downstream, and bringing that all together so that we can all see the data is very, very important. So let's talk about current state of plant automation before Tony tells us how things get so much better. Is the really good operators, the experienced operators that have just a brain full of tribal knowledge. They're taking in the data themselves. They're doing the rounds, they're seeing things, they're making notes, maybe not on paper, but in the back of their mind, what am I seeing and how do I react to it? And then they're obviously implementing changes, be it just a manual change to a gate, a valve, a pump, turning on and off a piece of process equipment. And the thing is, the more data they have, the better decisions they can make. The problem being, not everyone can see everything at all times, and the ability to review the data. What happened yesterday? What happened last night during the storm? What happened last year when we hit a drought and a dry spell with the plant? How did we react and respond to it? Sure, a good operator might remember, but how do you pass that knowledge on to the next generation of operators when that original operator decides to retire or move on to a different plant? So this is where we can take the current state of plant automation, really add a lot of good technology to it, and make plants better, safer, and more efficient. And this is where Tony takes over the journey.
Hey, Tony, you're muted.
All right. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm glad I have the right people to keep me straight around here. So we're going to rewind just a couple of seconds. So thanks, Dave and Brian, for queuing this up. I'm excited to have an opportunity to tell everybody about what we call the Rio Mobile journey here at REWA. And this is a really great example of business enablement, where technology meets business process. And I really love the fact that Dave, that you ended with a person on that last slide, because at the end of the day, if we're talking about technology, we're talking about people. I mean, it's here to make our lives easier. And then when we look at the tagline on this slide, and I'll have to full disclosure, I didn't come up with this tagline. And at first, I went home when we were reciting this, rehearsing this over the prior couple of weeks, and I think about this tagline: REWA's journey towards defensible and accessible data. The accessible part is real clear to me when it comes to Rio Mobile, and I think it will be very clear to everybody on this call who, if you aren't familiar with the tool. The defensible part, that's the part that had me scratching my head a little bit here and there. And then I started thinking, I was like, what process are we changing here at REWA? Where's the business enablement? So before we dig into this, I'd like to, at a high level, describe the process that in our challenge we were dealing with. So like many of us on the call, I think we're probably familiar with what we call a plant round sheet process. At REWA, we refer to our plants as WRFs, Water Resource Recovery Facilities. So it's this round sheet process is where the operational team goes around the plant or the WRF here at REWA on a daily basis and basically does health checks on the plant, right? Checks the flows and the tank levels, the weather. There's quite a few data points depending on the size of the plant. So this this particular process was a pretty well-entrenched paper process here at REWA for the last couple of decades. So if you think about the challenges we had with that process, I mean, it's been serving REWA well. However, the data, it gets put on a sheet of paper, and the paper we all know is subject to a lot of potential. It's fragile, so to speak, right? Weather, rain, it can get torn. It eventually makes its way into a control room. At some point, the operational staff, when they get around to it, they take that data, and this is one of our first big challenges, they rekey it into WIMS, right? So you have data entry issues, risk there. And then that paper round sheet gets put in a closet in the control room. Now, when questions arise around looking at historical round sheets to maybe dig into potential issues that are occurring at the plant, how do you get to that data? Well, it's locked in the closet. And you don't have any visibility within the organization to that data. And then on top of that, right, it might be hard to read that data from a piece of paper depending on how well the data was entered. So then that's when, in my mind, I started thinking how apropos or relatable that term defensible is, right? So when moving from the paper process to an automated digitization process has given REWA almost instantaneous visibility to this round sheet data, the health of our WRFs throughout the organization. And it enables us to answer questions and now start to drive analytics that Brian and Dave were referring to earlier. We couldn't really do that on paper. So the next few slides are going to be a deep dive into where we started and how we got to where we are in the value proposition from REWA's perspective. All right, so to start kind of at the top here, REWA is the wastewater provider that services the Greenville, South Carolina area. Greenville, if you're not familiar with Greenville, is in the northwest corner of South Carolina. A lot of people think of the beach when they think of South Carolina. We're actually quite the opposite. We're nestled in the mountains. And then, of course, Aquatic Informatics, central to this tool, has come up with Rio, and you're going to hear me say Rio Mobile. That's the mobile component of the full Rio tool, and that's the component that we're really using to leverage and enable the operational staff here at REWA. And then Bellwether Consulting, we're acting as the implementation partner for Rio here at REWA. And then to give everybody a feel for the geographic area that REWA services, Greenville area is about 800 square miles, just over 500,000 in population. About 100,000 of that is in the city. That's a picture of the downtown area of Greenville. And REWA has been around for 100 years and is comprised of 450 miles of collections piping, served by 87 pump stations, flowing into 9 water treatment facilities, purifying more than 40 million gallons of water daily. And then just a few fun factoids. For those of you who may not know, if you're a foodie or who doesn't love food, Greenville, South Carolina is a great little foodie destination, particularly that downtown area. And then you may notice that little silver sliver in the lower left-hand corner of that picture. That's actually a suspension footbridge over the main river that flows right through the downtown area. And that footbridge was actually designed by the same architect who designed the famous Charleston suspension bridge. So if you've never been to Greenville and you ever have a chance, I highly recommend it. All right, well, let's roll up our sleeves and get down to this project. So as mentioned, the scope of this is 9 water resource recovery facilities and 40 operators. And I do want to point out that the breadth of wastewater treatment volumes here at REWA differs significantly from the smallest to the largest. The smallest WRF treats 100,000 MGD, million gallons per day of wastewater. The largest WRF hits about 40 million gallons. And why am I saying this? Well, I'm saying this because whenever we look at technology at REWA, we have to take into account technologies that scale. We need a technology that can service a small plant and service a big plant. And when we were looking out for technologies that could digitize our WRF round sheet, we landed on Renewable because it's very scalable. So now let's talk a little bit about the journey and the value proposition of Rio. And to do that, we need to talk about the other side of this coin, the challenges, right? The two sides of the same coin, right? So, and this is the fascinating part from my perspective a lot of times, and back to the business enablement piece, right? What really drove this change at REWA was a key business process change around streamlining and a leaner workforce. So back in 2018, that's when that started, like a lot of companies doing more with less. And as REWA started to trim down its workforce, and I'm specifically referring to the operational staff of the plants, we man our plants with boots on the ground 8 hours a day. So 16 hours a day, they are unmanned. So everywhere we look, and this is one example, there's a lot of others. This is one key example where, how do we make our operators' job easier? We're asking them to do more with less. And so when you look at the value prop that Rio brings, you start to be able to see how much of a business enablement improvement this has been for REWA. First of all, you may recall the process. Write it down on a piece of paper, the old process, bring it to the control room. When you get time, key it into WIMS, wait for that synchronization to get to the various dashboards to make it available to the operational management across the enterprise. What happens now? Well, the operator walks around the WRF, the plant, with a mobile phone, with the Rio mobile app. And as they enter and do the round sheet data, it goes right into WIMS automatically, right? And then once it's in WIMS, it's pretty much instantaneously available to the operational management without them having to wait. So huge efficiency improvement. Think about the data accuracy improvements. Knowing what the old process was, there's no more duplicate data entry. So not that there isn't data accuracy challenges still, right? Because you have a human being keying in information, but we've reduced a step in the chain and a link in the chain, so to speak, of having to do duplicate data entry into WIMS. And then the data visibility. And this I'd like to tie back to the defensibility. That tagline in the beginning of this presentation that I thank Brian and Dave for made me think hard. The data visibility is it's night and day with Rio Mobile. Right, so now the data is in one centralized place. It's digitized, and the operational leadership can get to that data at a moment's notice, and they can start to enforce better process. Before, in the paper world, you kind of didn't know if the WRF round sheets were being done. I mean, they were, generally speaking, but like if you think about like, how do you really know and enforce? And if DHEC or EPA is knocking at your door, where do you go and you look at that data? Oh, hey, supervisor, will you take a screenshot of the paper round sheets for the last couple of weeks, or fax them, scan them in, and send them my way? Now we just bring up the screen. And the last piece to this journey, and security is it's a pretty popular word these days, I think, with all the bad actors, malicious actors. I'm talking about data security and all the hacks and phishing scams, stuff like that. REWA is highly secure conscious. So whenever we look for technologies, they have to really comply. They have to be architected, if you will, in a very secure manner. I will point out that even though in Rio checks all the boxes there, you know, if you're in the boat that you're looking at Rio, you know, this is not to be underestimated. This is a piece of the project that you definitely want to carefully plan, because you have to put Rio on the right architecture to leverage all of its highly secure features. All right, so how did it actually happen here at Rio? And what did that time frame look like? Well, it's taken us about 22 months, and about half of that, a little bit less than half of that, was actual deployment time. So you may be asking, well, why weren't you what were you doing for the other time? Well, we were planning. We have a lot of conversations around that here at REWA, because, you know, sometimes it's an instinctive reaction to just want to start doing. And what we found and what we're trying to do here is plan so that when we get to the doing goes a lot easier. Sometimes, though, the planning doesn't feel like doing, so it's like people might have the perception we're not doing anything. I'm probably getting off on a little tangent here. That's a little bit of a philosophical discussion, but the bottom line here is we started back in March of 2022, and then we did quite a bit of planning. And when I say planning, I'm talking about the requirements gathering phase of this project. This is not a small change, especially for an organization that's digitizing a well-entrenched paper process. So what do I mean by that? What did it look like? Well, we took the WRF paper round sheets and we put them in an Excel spreadsheet. That was kind of our starting point. We said, look, this is what we're going to do. And as we started to work with that spreadsheet and reformat the data points with the operational team, it became really clear that the time was right for process change, right? Because remember, the paper process hadn't changed in 2 decades, right? So it didn't really mirror the real process. What was happening was the operational staff was taking pieces of paper and flipping around, and they all did it different. Now you're talking organizational change. It's another retrospective that you want to be keep in the back of your head when you're going down this journey, right? So it's not a small change. So we used the change to improve business process, meaning that we said you're going to do it, you, operational staff, we are going to do it the same way, all the operators at each plant. And then we mapped out that way. And, you know, generally speaking, for those of you who know how a plant's laid out, it goes like, hey, we're going to start at the influent, then we're going to go to the clarifiers, and then we're going to go on and we're going to end at the effluent, right? And so we kind of formalize that. We use this project to do that. The reason that's so important is because they can't flip around on a piece of paper anymore, right? They're having to scroll around in a digital form. And so if you don't have everybody doing the same process, your user adoption's going to be challenging. So what did we do? We mapped out those requirements. We standardized our process, and then we piloted. That's a nice way to kind of relieve the blood pressure, if you will, right, for such a big change. So we said, we're going to try it here at this one WRF. We're going to get feedback, and then we're going to go from there. It went well. It was a small WRF. We always do it at the small ones. And then we moved on down the line, and fast forward to now, we are about 95% complete. We're targeting completion this month. It may bleed over a little bit into January. We find a few things. We keep pulling a few little threads out of the sweater, so to speak, but it's all been beneficial. and we're kind of down to, we have all of our WRFs running this. We're tweaking the larger WRFs. Just keep in the back of your head, for the larger WRFs, that's going to be your bigger change management. So process standardization is key. And then we should be wrapped up with this project around December or January of next year. All right, well, this is just about the last slide here. I think the second to last. So you've heard about our journey, our challenges, our journey, the project, and now let's kind of sum it up with our retrospective and the value proposition. And so, if you're thinking about this or going through this, you may relate to some of these challenges. If you're thinking about this, some of these definitely key to keep in the back of your mind, and I'll emphasize the ones that we have found very key as lessons learned. Scope. Right off the bat, the planning. Clarify your scope. When we started these conversations, every conversation we got in with the operations team kind of went like this. Well, so we're going to do the WRF and the lab, and I kept hearing this lab round sheets, and I couldn't understand why they kept talking lab, because I'm thinking about the WRF round sheet. But turns out that in the operational realm, like, they kind of consider the lab kind of part of their round. It's another round. And so we had to get really discerning about what we're really talking about doing here, because it's not a small change. We wanted to put our blinders on. So we said, let's deal with the lab later. Let's get through the WRF round. The system architecture, as I mentioned, not to be underestimated. The build work involved with this, to make sure that you take advantages of all of the strong security that the Rio technology is built for. The value case and success criteria. So this is another thing that we're really trying to spend time on up front here at REWA. And it's not to be underestimated. So the short story here is, and I want to make sure that we have some time for Q&A, so I'm going to move through those next few as quickly as possible, is that we did some time studies here. And after kind of spending a fair bit of time on time studies, how long it takes on paper versus how long it might take in Rio, everybody kind of threw up their hands, because it was kind of, everybody's head was about to explode. So we just said, let's try it. And what happened? The next one, great user experience. It's a really good user experience. And so it kind of sells itself. What's the next one? Easy configuration. So depending on the organization that you're in, if you have some technical chops, AQI is designed such a good tool here. You can roll out and build new forms relatively easy. Now, of course, AQI is there in the wings. They are in their wings for us right now, like if we need them. But we do a lot of the new build work, so to speak, in-house. An interesting thing is, when we went into this, we thought that the iPad was going to be the mobile device of choice. Turns out it was the phone. Why? Well, because if I'm an operator, then lugging around an iPad is kind of clunky. The phone fits in my pocket. So, in Rio Mobile is designed for the small form factor of a phone. So it works quite well. Some of our operational staff uses iPads, whichever they prefer. One really interesting thing about this is the minimal time draw on the ops team. I don't have the numbers. I don't intend to share the numbers right here. I'm happy to, at any point if anybody is curious. But when it comes down to the actual rolling out to an operational team, it's about an hour or two, generally speaking. You show up, you put it on their phones, you show them how to log in, and then you just show them how to navigate the form. So it's a somewhat heavy draw on the technology team, but then a relatively low draw on the ops team, which, as we know, is really important if you're going to roll out technology to the ops teams. All of that leads to very high value proposition for REWA. Right? We now have centralization, automation, accessibility, And now we're queued up to build analytics on our WRF, on essentially the health of our plants, which really talks to the data quality, right? We're getting better data quality in, and because of the great user experience of the tool, we've had a high user adoption rate. I won't say it's all been roses, right? Like, I mean, it's a process change, right? And it's good to use the opportunity to standardize. But at this point now, right, we've got relatively high user adoption. And then the last slide, because we're seeing the good value we're seeing with the digitization of the WRF rounds, we plan to come in right behind this next year and digitize the lab data sheets with Rio as well. And then continue partnering with AQI, giving feedback to improve the product. Just the last thing on this, I'd like to, just shout out to AQI is that, it's not always that, a software vendor is very responsive, I'll say. And in the early days of this rollout, when we were, having some growing pains getting the user adoption up, there was a lot of collaboration going on with the AQI product dev team. They have their product idea channel, and there were some really key changes that got turned around in relatively short order for us to help with this. So we look forward to continue that partnership. Appreciate the time. Back over to you, Dave.
Fantastic, Tony. And really, that's the best way to learn about these products, is to hear it from those who use it day in and day out. The operators, the supervisors, those who need to interface with the product and the platform. Will tell you the good, the bad, and what their future plans are. So we're going to get into the learnings on how we go down this path. So the big reasons we want to do this, first of all, in the industry in its current state, is we don't have the time, the labor to be inefficient with the work that we do, be it staff shortages, trying to take over more plants, larger populations. We want to make sure that once we do something once, we do it well and we do it right, and that is secure and saved for all of time. Leads us right to data accuracy. Every time you need to rewrite a number, change it from a Post-it note to a clipboard to a computer onto a form, or changing which database it's on, there's a chance for that data to be corrupted, lost, or inaccurately transcribed. And finally, like my earlier point, the data defensibility. Plants are what they are, and they run in a certain way. If they have a need for new equipment or more energy or whatever it might be, everyone needs to know. It can't just be an operator secret that a certain pump or process is a struggle every day. We should use the data to make better choices and to grow the plant and to improve the plant, so that everyone knows why we're doing things and eventually can make it as safe and efficient as possible. And that leads us to kind of the stepwise how we do this and how we get these insights. Again, starts with good data, doing things that the operators are already doing in the lab, in the process, and in the field. That if they're doing rounds and collecting data, or if that data is sent directly from the controller to the historian or to WIMS or to Rio, is that data accurate? And that takes us to the sensor diagnostics. Predictively diagnosing, just because there's a number on a screen doesn't mean that that number is accurate. Maybe that sensor needs to be cleaned or calibrated or replaced. Will the sensor be smart enough to tell you that it has needs? And then, do you have to go out to that sensor to retrieve that kind of information? Through a platform known as MSM, or mobile sensor management, not only can you get that predictive diagnosis data, but you can also get the other really process critical information like safety, PPE, spare parts, reagents, so that when an operator, maybe they're just walking out to a certain plant process, maybe they have to drive to another facility to bring an instrument back online. Did they just make that trip with the right parts? Do they have the right PPE in place so they can do it safely and effectively. Now that we have all this really good data at our fingertips and we know how the plant works, we can say, what are our goals? What is our permit goals? What is our process goal to really optimize in real time so that we can react to current conditions? Things on down in the Carolinas, they get hurricanes. Up here in the upper Midwest, we get blizzards. The West gets droughts. We always have to respond to the environment in which we work. How do we make the plant self-responsive so that we're not putting an operator out in a plant in Minnesota in January, where I happen to find myself right now, but it's beautiful in Minnesota today. As far as the data management, how do we keep all this together? How do we make it, the word of the day, defensible, but also retrievable and also secure? We want it to be accessible to everyone, but only everyone who's allowed to see it. So the level of IT security and data security and management is truly important at all levels of the plant, as it should be. And then finally, what can we learn? What did we learn today from an experienced operator or a new operator that's trying to learn that plant, or maybe they just switched to a new plant? How do we give this insight action? And that's the ultimate journey of data, is to do something good with what we know. At this point, we're going to open it up to the Q&A. As far as the panel that we have here, I'll let Brian take over.
All right. Hey, thank you both, Dave and Tony. Yeah, really well done. Really appreciate that. Yeah, so let's take some questions. So got a lot of questions that have been posted throughout the webinar. So Tony, a lot of these questions are going to be for you. So let's go ahead and start there if you're cool with that. One question that came in: has there been any challenges using a mobile phone in the field to enter data in terms of wastewater contamination on the cell phone, or difficulties with handling the electronic device?
It's a great question. I'd say yes, and that's what's driven the use of a smaller device, right? Because we went into this thinking that the operators are going to prefer the larger device like an iPad, but it turns out, to the question, is that like lugging around an iPad with everything else they're dealing with, it's not really effective. So, you know, their phone they can put in their pocket, that sort of thing. Now, I will say that in some of the plants, there's been some discussion around using an iPad, and the reason being is that because it's larger, they can see more of the data points as they scroll around. In those same conversations, we're looking at options like putting a ruggedized case on it, waterproofing it, maybe having a little shoulder strap. So we're exploring that route, but the larger percentage of the operational team is using the phone just for due to some of those risks around not, you know, being less likely to drop it into somewhere it shouldn't be, you know, something like that.
Might be a little bit better than the paper and coffee spills, right? Which I heard a lot about.
Yeah, oh, still better than paper. Yeah, everywhere you turn, it's better than paper. It's just that, and I want to give everybody a chance to answer the questions, but like that another big thing is the process change, right? That's the biggest challenge I think we've dealt with, is that when you are dealing with a round sheet that was on maybe 2 or 3 sheets of paper, then if you didn't have a standardized WRF process, round sheet process, that was kind of okay, because they would just flip around like, hey, I'm on sheet 2, I'm here, and now I'm on sheet 3. But then when you get into the digital realm, flipping is different, right? You're scrolling a lot. And so like what we found is, right, to make that transition easier, it kind of forced, which is a good thing, a standardized process of walking through the WRF the same way every time.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Tony. So yeah, a few more questions here for you since we got you. Did REWA go through a competitive procurement to select Rio? If so, what other systems were evaluated?
That's a great question. The answer to that is emphatically no. There are not a lot of players on the market in our experience in this realm. And so what kind of the way it evolved here at REWA was, Hach WIMS has been embedded here at REWA for probably 15 years. REWA, it's another fun story, I won't tell it now, but was an early adopter of some of the initial WIMS, like the beta versions of WIMS, right? So it was kind of a natural next step, right? When, the Renewable came along with AQI through AQI, i.e. Hach WIMS, and is so tightly integrated with WIMS to look at that carefully. Now, we started looking at it when it was named Claros. Some of you may remember that term, right? But we waited a bit for it to mature a little bit more, and then we jumped on the bandwagon with Rio.
Awesome. So a couple more questions. How well did staff buy in and proceed? Did you have the typical old school type staff reluctant to change?
Yeah, this is a great question. This is the organizational, getting a little bit of feedback, the organizational change management aspect of this project. And some of it's kind of a little bit of demographics, like what I mean by that, and it's not a bad thing, right? It's like, if you've been doing a paper process and you're a very seasoned operator and you've been doing a paper process for 20 years, maybe you've been an operator for 30 or 40 years, sometimes the propensity to change isn't as much as if you're a 20-year-old operator, you're new, and like the first thing they hand you is Renewable. It's like, and that's all right? So here at REWA we have a dispersion of operators at varying skill levels and varying ages. And so what we found is, and so there's that that any organization is going to deal with, and then there's the sheer volume of the data points. So the kind of the readiness to engage and adopt software, we can deal with that, right? Like, I mean, there's a way to deal with that, right? Organizationally, the issue about making Rio work for the operators, right? So that, like, hey, if I'm an operator and I've been doing the round in an hour and a half on my paper, and now it's taking me, say, 2 hours on Rio, like, that's the part that we've been focusing on. And that's where I start talking about process, is saying that, and what we've done is saying, okay, look, like, everybody's going to walk the plant the same way. We're going to lay out the data points the same way. So when you go into Rio, you're going to start at the influent, and you're just going to go down the line. That's been huge at the big plants. That's been critical at the bigger plants where we're dealing with, our biggest one that treats 40 million MGD a day. There's 800 data points, 100 of which maybe get filled out, but that's still a lot of data points to sort through. And if they're not in the order you need, it can be daunting and it can hurt your user adoption.
Yeah. So on that same note, what's your estimate of how much time operators are saving? I know you and I covered that a few months ago, but if you don't mind sharing with the group what the time saving was.
Yeah, so to be honest, like where we are with that is, like, at the larger WRFs, they're still spending a little more time. And when I say a little more time on Rio, it might be 30 minutes more at the operator level, because we're still in the user adoption phase and we're still tweaking the layout of the forms. At the smaller plants, they're saving, probably for each round, they're probably saving 10 to 30 minutes per round, because we're talking 10 to 50 data points, and so it's easy for them. And then it's just scrolling down that group of relatively small data points, and then they don't have to go into the control room and rekey it into WIMS. So it's an instantaneous win. The big ones are, honestly, our goal right now is to get them to where it's a wash right now on operator input time. And once we can get to that, we know it's a win in other areas, like our centralization of data and data defensibility and the analytics, and then we can start driving more process improvements.
Awesome. Hey, I'm going to give you a little bit of a break. I got plenty more questions for you, but I'm going to take a couple here for you.
All right.
Let's start with this one. So I see a question in there that says, well, it looks like more kind of a statement. So this is better software than Claros Collect. And my response to that is 100% absolutely. There's a lot more flexibility with Rio. I can name things what I want. I can delete data. I can manage the data. Whereas I was pretty limited with Claros Collect on the features and the functionality that I can do to be a true mobile data collection piece here. Big one is, deleting things, renaming things. I always like to joke about this one. I don't know where I heard this from, but hey, if I want to track number of dogs at the fence, I can track that. That was very difficult to do with Claros Collect as an example. So 100% better, in my opinion. Would you agree with that?
You're on mute, Dave.
We're good. We're good.
Okay.
I would say definitely, and it's one of the powers of AQI being partnered with Hach is that the legacy Claros was a Hach product with some good pieces, but partnering with AQI, acquiring, merging, however you want to say that, AQI has just given us so many more really good software engineers and developers to really respond to the customer's needs. What does good look like? What does the customer want to see on their round sheets, now digitized? And how can we respond to that where in the past we couldn't? We were kind of locked in to the best that the Claros platform had. Now the AQI platform is just so much more responsive than anything from that back in the day, the early versions of Claros.
Yep, and the simplicity piece, right? Huge improvement as well. And going back to that embracing, making it easier so there's a lot more embracement. So I need to stop there. There's a ton of questions, which is always great to see. So thank you to those who have submitted questions. We will take these questions. We will provide an answer to the rest of the questions, and we'll make sure to get that out to all attendees. So at this point, we just want to say thank you so much for joining this webinar. I hope this has been beneficial. And Tony, thank you again for your perspective, your insights, on your digital data journey, right? So it's totally awesome. So really appreciate your time. Just as a reminder, as we close this webinar, there's going to be a short survey at the end. So please take a look at that survey. We love your feedback. It helps us, to grow these and do additional webinars and really, take some key learnings away for ourselves. So please take the time to answer that quick survey for it. Again, thank you so much to everybody who attended. Really appreciate everybody's time, and to the panelists and to our host on behalf of AWWA, I want to thank you for putting this together. And until the next time, thank you so much for keeping our water safe and secure. Till the next time, everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.